During the coronavirus health crisis, all of us turn to social networks to consume information that can help us make, or sometimes does help us make, critical decisions about life. There's a lot of good information on social networks, but there's a lot of disinformation, misinformation, and so-called fake news. We often hear headlines like a Reuters story, and others have recently reported that Russia is deploying coronavirus disinformation to sow panic in the West. But it's hard to really understand what the difference is between disinformation, misinformation, and all this other jargon. I'm Dan Patterson, and here to help us understand inauthentic activity on the social web is Graham Brookie. He is the director of the Digital Forensic Research Lab at the Atlantic Council. Graham, thanks for your time today. I wonder if we can kind of start at the beginning and explain what is disinformation, misinformation, and inauthentic activity on the social web.
Thanks, Dan. That's a great question. First things first, at the Digital Forensic Research Lab, there's a term that you didn't mention that we definitely don't use, which is fake news. It's not objective. It's not a particularly good research term, and it does more harm than good. The terms that we do use in our work at spotting kind of falsehoods online, first and foremost, misinformation. And that is the spread of false information without intent. It's a little bit more passive. It's a little bit more pervasive. Some of my family members definitely do it. Like, you've definitely seen misinformation online. And then we have disinformation, which is the spread of false information with intent, meaning somebody is meaning to spread that information in order to manipulate or mislead you. So those are the definitions that we use.
Okay, so Graham, we often hear that Russia or other countries like Russia are deploying disinformation regarding coronavirus and other topics, but let's talk about coronavirus. What are we to make? How should we interpret headlines like this?
It's a little bit tough because, while yes, there are Russian influence operations about coronavirus, which the DFR lab has actually studied, but Russian influence operations aren't everything that is on the internet. There's plenty of disinformation and misinformation that aren't Russian influence operations. And so the way that we kind of think about it is, within disinformation, you have this geopolitical angle, and that's where we would typically put Russian influence operations, or the things that nation states do in the information space in order to gain advantage. And then we have ideology. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So what advantage, that kind of begs the question of why? Why would somebody coordinate disseminating misinformation across the social web?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why somebody would mislead people online. One is that kind of geopolitical disinformation. That's nation states trying to gain advantage over other nation states. That's where we would put Russian influence operations. But we also have a number of ideological actors who are spreading disinformation either internationally or domestically in order to kind of push their viewpoint or their bias. And then very importantly, in the face of COVID-19, we have economic disinformation. And that's folks that are spreading false information in order to make money or for economic gain. A fourth category that's extremely important to point out in the face of COVID-19 is health disinformation or misinformation. And that's like, crack cures for coronavirus that don't actually exist, right? People that are trying to say that this type of snake oil or that type of snake oil online is definitely going to cure coronavirus. And that's really, really dangerous right now.
Okay, so I read the news from a number of social networks like millions of other people do. How can I identify disinformation and kind of weed it out of my feeds? And where can I find good information that is useful and helps me and my family learn about the coronavirus crisis as it evolves?
That's the first and best question. So the only best practice in talking about coronavirus is pointing to the latest science-based and publicly accountable sources. And so if you have questions about COVID-19 itself, don't talk to me. Please visit coronavirus.gov, which is a website that is the latest information, and it's updated by the Centers for Disease Control. And then beyond that, like, what can you do to navigate what the World Health Organization is referring to as an infodemic happening in parallel to a pandemic? There's a number of steps that you can take, right? Consider the source of your information. And not only that, consider the source's source of information that you're seeing online. And when you consider the source, it guards you against disinformation, that deliberate spread of false information. And when you consider the source's source, it protects you from misinformation, or that like passive, pervasive. If your great aunt says something that seems a little off, check her source as well. Another extremely important step is to check your bias and check your source's bias. If you have a closed mind, then you might not get all of the facts, and that is critically important in a public health crisis.